Our speakers today are from Braver Angels, which they will tell you more about in their presentation. Jenn Borgioli Binis, the New York State Blue co-chair, is a freelance editor, researcher, fact checker who lives in Lancaster. She has been a Braver Angels member and volunteer for 3 years. Joe Canepa, the Western New York Blue co-chair, is a counselor and mediator who lives in Williamsville. He has been a Braver Angels member and volunteer for 3 years. Let's welcome Jenn and Joe and give them a warm welcome when they take our pulpit.
Good morning. Good morning. Hey, we will start with some introductions. So good morning. I think it is absolutely fabulous that we are following after, was it Miss Katie? Yeah. Did I hear her name? That we're after that about curiosity, because that is very much the premise of Braver Angels. So we'll tell you a bit more about the organization. As April said, it is the nation's largest cross-partisan secular organization dedicated to giving people the tools to talk politics. So when we talk about changing our minds, we often don't have the tools to have those conversations that help us change our minds, help us hear information, help us connect with people who have different views. So Bill Dougherty is one of the founders of Braver Angels, and every week he sends us out a newsletter. And about 8 months ago, I think, I was ready to quit. I was going to walk away from Braver Angels. It didn't seem pointless to me. Like, why on earth should I try to talk to people who see the world so differently than I do? Why should I even make an effort with people who want to hurt people that I love? What is the point of that? And Bill sent out his new letter, and he reminded us that social change happens in 3 ways. There are people who resist. There is a resistance. There are people who replace, who create something new. And then there are those who repair. And what he encouraged us to remember is that we can do all 3 of these things. So on one day, we can be part of the protest, and the next day we can talk about repair. That we can bring our full selves to the work of social change. And so I stay in Braver Angels because someone has to staff the repair bridge. As an example of that, people sometimes ask, well, can Braver Angels help me understand how to protest ICE? How do we stop ICE? And we say, that's not Braver Angels' work, that's other people's work. Our work is, what if your neighbor works for ICE? How do you talk to your neighbor? How do you maintain in community with your neighbor who works for ICE or who works for an organization you disagree with? So the big idea of Braver Angels is to provide people the tools to have conversations that are sometimes hard to have about politics. And so I'll turn it over to Joe, who'll kind of give you some more about Braver Angels.
As a founding principle, Braver Angels holds Abraham Lincoln's words up to sort of a guiding light. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. The mystic chords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave, to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broadland, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. And it was these words that inspired founding members Bill Dougherty and a handful of others shortly after the 2016 election, looking around at our country and the state of our discourse and giving us the inspiration to form a group that, as Jen said, is committed to the work of repair. We'll be saying a little bit more about how that work is done and why it might be needed.
Why don't we decided to share a mic? We've decided to share a mic, even though we have 2. So one of the things that we really focus on is helping us better understand people who hold different perspectives and different views. And one of the things that we do, and we're going to do this in more depth in the workshop this afternoon, is we talk about political stereotypes. And Braver Angels invests a lot of energy in researching and understanding where people come from. And so instead of saying to Reds, oh, this is what you think about blues and you're wrong for that, we instead say to blues, this is how we understand blues think about Reds. Let's talk about how blues think about people who hold different views. Or we say to Reds, let's think about how Reds think about blues. So we can't change other people's minds. All we can do is change ourselves and how we think about the world. And these are some of the examples of some of the stereotypes that people hold. For example, when people who identify as red is a general term we use in Braver Angels for people who lean to the right. They identify as conservative. They identify as Republican, perhaps libertarian. When we ask Reds, what do you think of people who are blue, people who are progressive, people who are liberal, people who are Democrats? Reds, we kind of think of it that way. How do you think they view you? And what Reds report is that they think blues see them as racist, anti-immigrant, uncaring, homophobic, anti-woman, anti-science Bible thumpers. When we ask blues, how do you think Reds see you? Blues think Reds see them as arrogant, elitist, favoring big government, fiscally irresponsible, unpatriotic, anti-religious, anti-free speech, hypersensitive snowflakes. This is how we view each other. It is no wonder we have an incredibly hard time talking to each other. If one side thinks the other sides are bigots, and this side thinks this sides are snowflakes, how on earth do we ever talk to each other? Braver Angels is entirely dedicated to the project of giving us the tools to get past the stereotypes in order to talk to each other. So the workshop we're doing this afternoon at noon is called Depolarizing Ourselves. And it is entirely time for you to think about how you think about the folks on the other side, whether you identify as conservative or if you identify as liberal. So that's the work we'll be doing this afternoon. And I think it's... And as part of that, strategy.
One of the most pivotal and fundamental tools that we share with people who attend our workshops is the LAP method. LAP stands for LAPP. Listen, acknowledge, pivot, and perspective. And as a brief sort of summary of this, if you think about the last time you've had an argument with somebody over a political issue, how does it usually go? I hear what this person is saying, and I need to correct them. I need to tell them why they're wrong, what they've got wrong, maybe why they're stupid, misinformed. How productive is that approach? Not very productive, right? So what we teach, and by the way, for anybody in any kind of an interpersonal relationship of any kind, this is actually a very useful tool to remember with any kind of conflict you have, whether it be a friend, family member, romantic partner. First, listen. And listen to acknowledge and reflect what you hear the other person saying. Once they feel that they've been heard and understood, then we might have an opportunity to share our point of view. After we've listened and we've acknowledged by summarizing, paraphrasing what we heard them say, we don't quite yet jump into here's what I think. We first try something else. It's known as the pivot question. Okay, if I've heard you correctly, I think this is what you're telling me. Did I get that right? Yep, okay. I happen to have a different viewpoint on this matter. Would it be okay if I shared that with you? And that pivot question now invites the other person to choose if they want to hear that alternate perspective or not. If they say no, we respect that. Thank you for your time. But if they say yes, then we can provide our perspective, focusing on I statements, avoiding generalizations, and looking for points of agreement where we can.
One of the before we open the floor for your questions, one of the points that I always appreciate Braver Angels is we never ask anyone to change their minds or give up their values. So some organizations focus on compromise. Braver Angels is not about compromise. We can acknowledge common ground when we hear it and we recognize it, but our goal is not to meet in the middle. The goal is to stay anchored where we are and to hear someone who's anchored someplace else. So we don't have to sacrifice who we are, we don't have to compromise our values, we just have to find the humanity in each other, and that's all the tools that we focus on. So it's a cross-partisan, secular, let's just figure out how to get better at talking about politics. And we are happy to answer any questions that you might have about the organization or this afternoon's workshop.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My question is, there was a Braver Angels representative here, maybe about a year ago or maybe less, at one of our Saturday justice meetings. And, I had asked about it and they said, actually, we're having a hard time. We find a lot of blue members, but we're having a very hard time finding red members. And so at that time I didn't join because so where is that now? And then do you have any, if you could tell us where that is now, and do you have any plans for, engaging more of a bilateral participation?
Yeah, and thank you, Kate, thank you. It's a very great question. It is something that the national organization experiences as a little bit of a struggle point. Something about the nature of this project strikes people as a little bit more liberal leaning to begin with. And on top of that, we find that people who are more conservative leaning have had so many bad experiences trying to talk to people on the left. They're just done with it. They don't want to listen. They don't want to engage because they've had such bad experiences. Currently, we are in a little bit of a better place locally. We've connected with a few people who lean more right, or red, as we say. We are still looking for a red co-chair, but we've made some success in connecting with some more right-leaning individuals who are connecting us with their communities, their families, their groups. And so we are looking for that sort of ripple effect. Make contact with one or two, and then they go back to their communities. Hey, those blues aren't so bad after all. And then it kind of spreads from there. So we are seeing some growth there.
To give some insight into some of the struggles friends on the right are having, is that there are a fair number of reds who say, well, I'm red, I'm just not MAGA. And so they don't want to be identified publicly as a red for risk of being thought of being MAGA. They're like, I'm conservative, but I'm not one of those conservatives. And that's a problem that's a tension that many of our red friends are struggling with right now. How do you identify as a conservative in America when your party looks the way it looks? How do they negotiate that tension?
First, thank you for this presentation. I was talking to a friend who said he's really purple. He likes the Republican, Eisenhower did the road system, our highway system. He liked the fact that Roosevelt established Social Security, all Republican. Well, he was a Democrat, but he did some things he liked Teddy Roosevelt and all the national parks. But he said, I'm pro-gay. He said, I don't think I could. So I asked him, I just met with him recently. I said, they're looking for a co-chair. Could you do that? Because on paper, he's a Republican. Believes in fiscal conservancy and all that stuff. Would he be a candidate for your partnership?
So the question is, if someone identifies as purple, meaning they're neither red, they're neither blue, could they be a red co-chair? If he's comfortable standing with saying, I'm a Republican, yes, that would be great. One of the things, this conversation has come before, and I'm curious about Joe's answer, there are folks who say, I hate both parties. And to them, I say, I completely appreciate where you're coming from. Braver Angels perhaps is not the project for you. Because Braver Angels is organized around the idea that one of the issues we have is people from the left can't talk to people on the right. If you hate everybody on both sides, you're welcome to come, but we might not be solving the problems you're seeking to solve. Or if, something along those lines. And we're not looking to make purple. We're not looking to combine red and blue. But what we find sometimes is that we get down to particular issues, we're all a little bit purple. When we actually kind of start having issue-based conversations. There's a great project that came out of Long Island where they did common ground around immigration. They brought together 15 reds, 15 blues, made charts, and looked for overlap. And they found a lot of overlap once they shook off a lot of the language, once they stopped using particular language and kind of found common ground. So for purple friends, if he's comfortable identifying as a red for the sake of Braver Angels, we'd love to chat with them. But people who truly feel outside of the kind of partisan nature, perhaps a different project is a better fit for you. Braver Angels is focusing on the issue of reds and blues.
To your friend specifically, I, as the local Western New York Blue co-chair, I'm a registered Democrat. I am very dissatisfied with the Democrat Party, so I don't, in typical conversations, say, hey, I'm a Democrat. So I wouldn't see that as a bar for your friend if they want to join as a co-chair. The project is really focused on how do we connect better with our neighbors, with the people that we share communities with. It is more focused on repairing those divides amongst people than amongst parties. So hopefully that helps.
Where do you have your meetings? Because I live in a red area, and I know that because I put up blue signs and, they didn't like that.
We had a very thrilling day because we were able to buy a sign. We actually got like $100 to spend on a sign that you'll see if you come to the workshop. We'll go anywhere. We have no money. We have no support. We have a lot of national free support. But wherever you need us to go, we'll go, basically, is the answer to that question. We do have a workshop called Blue in a Red Community, and we have one called Red in a Blue Community. So Braver Angels does offer workshops on that particular tension of being a blue and a red.
There are also a lot of online resources for people who want to join virtual workshops and debates. So that solves a geographical problem as well. You can engage at the national level too.
I have a clarifying question for me. Is the purpose of Braver Angels to have us develop our individual skills to deal with these situations when we encounter them individually? Or is your goal to set up workshops for communities or groups to have group dialogue, or both? And then I have a subsequent question. What do you do when somebody just starts off angry with your format of LAP? How do you bring it all back? Because that happened to me recently in the dog park, and not about politics. Go figure.
So there's certainly, to your first question, a little bit of both. A lot of our workshops are focused on teaching and sharing those individual skills so that we can go into our conversations with friends, family, community, and learn how to sort of lead that conversation in a better way. We also hold debates, so then we get communities together to now display and demonstrate, here's how we come together and discuss these things as a group in a communal setting. So definitely both. The question that you then asked about, what if somebody responds with anger? So there were 4 steps in that process: listen, acknowledge, pivot, provide. If somebody has an active emotion like anger, I would suggest sticking with the listen and acknowledge for a bit. Listen, 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 acknowledge, acknowledge, acknowledge. So by way of example, I can tell you're really passionate about this topic. It sounds like you're really fired up. Maybe you're really upset about it. Can you tell me more about how this has touched you and how you've developed such a fired up position on this? People really like being heard. People really like having the opportunity to be understood. And if you can reflect that to somebody who is angry, maybe the work at that point is just helping that person feel like, okay, this person might not agree with me, but at least they've heard me. And they haven't shut me down. They haven't ridiculed me. They haven't, grouped me in with a bunch of crazy on the other side. And that alone can go a long way towards repairing that divide.
Hi, thanks for walking all the way back here. So I've recognized you because I've been to a workshop before, so you might recognize me too. So I think one of the problems, or one of the barriers that I personally have with this is that it was essentially what you're saying is that, we need to be understanding and validate other people's perspectives. It's the same thing that I do with my toddlers, that even if I believe that the emotion and the thought that you're having is completely irrational, I should validate that as, a reasonable response from your perspective. And I would have wholeheartedly agreed with this strategy maybe pre-2016. But one of the biggest concerns that I have is that democracy requires shared grounding in a shared truth. And we need to acknowledge reality. And I think we are living in a world where we no longer have shared reality anymore. And that lack of shared reality is harmful towards our democracy. So for us to be saying, I validate a perspective that you have, for example, that an election result is not valid. You say, I don't believe that this president won this election. And I say, okay, I validate that as a reasonable perspective. My argument would be, that this is actually quite damaging to democracy to validate that perspective. And I know you said, there's resistors, and then there's repairers, and they're not the same people. But if the repairers are essentially, I don't want to say this the wrong way, if the repairers are potentially harming the resistance by validating perspectives that are actually harmful to democracy, how can we repair in that circumstance? Like I said, pre-2016, I can see how validation and all of this stuff could work. But in a case of no longer shared reality, where that lack of shared reality is potentially harmful for our democracy, how do we handle that?
So the question is, and I think Brianna used a great word, she used the word acknowledge. And so one of the skills, it took me an incredibly long time to learn, my human instinct is to say, I hear you saying you think the election was stolen. I'm not going to say that as when I have my Braver Angels hat on. I'm going to say, I hear that election security matters to you. It's important to you that every person's vote counts. I understand it's important to you that we can trust the process we use to elect our officials. So my acknowledgement is going to be a reality that I agree with. I'm not going to agree that the election was stolen. I'm not going to say, I hear that you're saying this, because I don't agree with that. I'm not going to say that. I am going to try to find common ground. I agree that election security matters. I work as an election poll worker. Can I tell you my experience as an election poll worker and why my perspective is that elections can be trusted? So I'm not going to acknowledge the big thing. I'm going to find a tiny little sliver. Okay, we're going to stand together in just this moment and find common ground. So it's taken me 3 years, and I still make mistakes when I'm doing it. But 3 years of, okay, I don't have to agree to something I disagree with. I don't have to acknowledge their reality. I understand you think I hear you saying that it's hard to determine. No, I can't even say that. I was going to say that the earth is round. But no, I'm not. How do you find common ground there? I understand you. I agree we live on a planet called Earth. We got this. We'll find common ground with the flat earther. We both live on Earth. Yay! So the constant practice, and one of the reasons I love being a volunteer is I get to keep practicing as moderator. What will I say when someone comes to me and says something? I'm like, I do not know what reality you're in, and I do not want to have you walk away thinking I agree with that reality. So the constant practicing of the skills of where can I find something that I can agree with and I can acknowledge that I agree with. Kind of that sliver. That makes sense? Kind of like that. Okay.
And Jen, you modeled a couple of the skills when it comes to that very, very difficult problem of lacking shared realities. Is acknowledging, okay, I'm hearing that what you have learned on this topic is X, Y, and Z, and here's where you have learned that from. I have some experience from a different school of thought, or I have some information from a different source. Would it be okay with you if I shared some of that information that I have learned? And part of the repair work is actually starting to repair that reality divide as well. We're almost certainly still going to have a difference of opinion because we go back to those information silos. But we're just having a little bit of a better conversation, acknowledging, okay, your perspective comes from that source of information. That I can see where you get how that leads you to this conclusion. Here's my sources. Here are my sources. Can I share that with you? And okay, here they are. And we don't have to really be too shy about the fact that we have different sources of our realities.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I had a very similar situation about 2 weeks ago. I have a lovely neighbor who's a Republican. And she's been a Republican all of her life. She watches Fox News only, right? So we kind of can sense where she's coming from. So we're having a chat, not necessarily about politics. And it was the primary day, and I said I was on my way to vote. She said she wasn't voting because there was no Republican on the ballot. This is Lancaster. And the reason she wasn't voting is she would continue to vote Republican because Democrats were in support of sex change operations in schools. And she believed it. And she's an intelligent woman, very nice, but she's bought into a belief set. So I did acknowledge how she felt. And I wondered at the time, because I did have some data in my head, how effective it would be to talk about the data in terms of, I have another perspective. And I wasn't sure whether to take the step on the data or what I knew to be fact. So I'll pose that question to you.
That is an issue that for a lot of people is a very closely held and very strong opinion driver. So again, that's the kind of thing, I'm sorry, the question you asked earlier about somebody feeling anger. When somebody has a particularly strong emotion, we want to spend more time with listening first and acknowledging first. If there comes a point in that conversation where somebody really is indicating, okay, yeah, you get me, you've heard me, you understand me, thank you. When we get some kind of indicator like that, usually then there might be an opportunity for that pivot question. Now, if it's okay, I don't want to force this on you, but if you're interested, I have some, I've read some stuff on this, I've got some statistics, would it be okay if I shared that with you? And again, if they say no, we respect that no. But we really want to put that work in of listening, acknowledging first, and then looking for that opportunity for that invitation after.
Just to share with you a bit more what's happening with Braver Angels Western New York, we have some flyers that we're happy to share. We do offer workshops as an organization. We're doing Depolarizer Within. We have a whole workshop dedicated to just the LAP strategy. We spent an hour and a half just talking about how to get better at that strategy. We have one called Common Ground, where we bring together equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats to find common ground in the language of common ground, not necessarily agreeing to common ground. And then Families and Politics, which is my personal favorite workshop, where we talk about the particular dynamics of having hard political conversations in families, and how do we negotiate that, and how do we not walk away from families? How do we stay connected to family even when it seems impossible? This summer and fall, we're going to be hosting a series of 3 debates in Lancaster, the Lancaster Village Center. On August 17th, we're going to be hosting a debate on term limits. And the way that Braver Angels debate works is that it's not about winning, it's about a resolution. So the resolution is we should limit elected officials to a set number of terms. The supervisor from Cheektowaga, who is a Democrat, and a Republican from the Lancaster Town Board will be joining to speak in favor of the resolution. 2 UB professors will be speaking against the resolution. And if you're wondering how can anyone be against term limits, the argument, it's a form of voter suppression. It is the government telling you who you can and cannot vote for. So that is one of the arguments against that particular resolution. September 15th, we'll be talking about flock cameras. Resolved, network surveillance systems like Flock are a good use of taxpayer dollars. If you know anyone willing to speak in favor of that, please give me their name. I'd love to connect with them, get them to speak in favor of the resolution. And then October 13th, it's healthcare. Resolved, New York State should prioritize Medicaid for all. So we'll be having those debates this spring. We have cards, we have flyers. Joe and I will be hanging around. We're happy to, you can sign up online for the debates just to come and hear. Person speaks for 4 minutes. The audience can ask questions, but my favorite thing is you can't ask the speaker the question. You ask the moderator your question. So you're not yelling at the person talking. The moderator controls the debate. It's fabulous. I participated in a national one. There were over 1,000 people participating. The debate was abolish ICE. So I had my 4 minutes to rant and rave against ICE, and I put on my resist hat, and I argued for 4 minutes against ICE. People asked me some great questions to the moderator, and the guy after me said negative. We should not abolish ICE. And he listed reasons, and at the end of it, I thought, I never thought of that. I still want to abolish ICE, but I never thought of that before. That was interesting to learn. So the debates really give us some different ways to think. And I really wanted to stress that with Braver Angels, you don't have to sacrifice your values. We're not looking for some, murky middle ground. It's, I'm planted here, you're planted there. How do we stay in community with each other? Anything else to add? All right, 12 o'clock. We'll hang out in the back. We'll see you at 12 o'clock, those of you who are joining us for the workshop.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Joe and Jen. That was great.